So it's been another busy day here in Ukraine. Let me keep you up to abreast with all the developments. In the eastern part of the country, in a city called Donetsk, which is very close to the Russian border, there were clashes between pro-Russian Ukrainians and Ukrainians who want the Russians out of this country once and for all. These clashes were around one of the government buildings where one side hoisted a flag and then the other side hoisted its own flag. Potentially quite dangerous. There were a few injured, but nothing more serious than that. At the same time, the wheels of diplomacy have been grinding, albeit slowly, elsewhere in Paris, where the Secretary of State of the US, John Kerry, met with his Russian counterpart, Sergei Lavrov. At the same time, Europe has given a lot of money to this country, money it desperately needs. So let's start first of all with the diplomacy of the day, and let's go to our political editor, Gary Gibbon, who has the story from London.
This afternoon, Russian-speaking residents in Donetsk in eastern Ukraine stormed the city hall. They clashed with Ukrainian armed police and military. The attackers restored the Russian flag to the roof of the building, only hours after Ukrainian forces had taken it down. Western governments are desperate to stop Russia intervening militarily here in eastern Ukraine, repeating what it's done in Crimea, flooding Ukrainian territory with Russian troops. Scenes like this show how tense and unstable the situation is. In Paris, the first attempts at a diplomatic breakthrough. Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov met the US Secretary of State John Kerry. It was the first face-to-face meeting between the US and Russia since the crisis in Ukraine intensified, but there were no reports of progress. They were in Paris with other foreign ministers for long-planned talks about Lebanon. William Hague said the aim today was to get the Russian and Ukrainian ministers talking to each other.
So this is an opportunity to bring Russia and Ukraine into direct communication and negotiation with each other, with international support, with other nations present. I think it's very important they are in direct communication at ministerial level, at a senior level, to, first of all, to avoid miscalculation.
But that meeting never happened. The Ukrainians turned up this morning to hear the US Secretary of State repeat the agreement signed in 1994 in which Russia promised not to invade Ukraine.
And none of their weapons will ever be used against Ukraine except in self-defense.
The Russian foreign minister refused to come to this gathering, so the Ukrainian team set off for the airport straight afterwards. They were then persuaded to come back and hover in Paris in case they were needed for consultation. Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has repeatedly said in the talks that he wants Ukraine's deposed leader Viktor Yanukovych back in power. The other foreign ministers are trying to persuade him to focus on how to calm and stabilise the country ahead of May elections. President Hollande will be amongst the 28 EU leaders meeting tomorrow in Brussels to discuss next steps. US Secretary of State Kerry knows there will be many round that table who don't want to threaten Russia with tough economic sanctions, as they could harm their own economies more than they hurt Russia's. But all planned talks are at the mercy of events on the ground in Ukraine, and the fear that situations like the one tonight in Donetsk will tip into violence. In the city where Russian-speaking demonstrators stormed the city hall earlier, tonight Russian flags massively outnumbered by Ukrainian ones.